A mysterious whistle in the woods. Since I reside in Massachusetts, most people typically associate it with one of 4 geographic locations: Salem, Cape Cod, Boston, and so on. The remainder I now refer to as scary forests. The topic of this article is some eerie words in western Massachusetts. My home was purchased almost a year ago. The construction is a brick square with 2 stories. Many people believe that it was utilized for business purposes prior to being used as a home. It is located nearly 500 feet from the road and has a gravel drive that I and the delivery people don't particularly like. Out of the corner of my eye, I have caught sight of a few objects, including a brown cat. My cats have never warned me of anything other than a mouse in the walls. However, the most significant fact is that my backyard is wooded. Since my backyard is a conservation area, no homes will ever be built there. I've seen owls, deer, opossums, bobcats, bears with cubs, and many other small animals. I've heard even more, which takes me to an incident that occurred a few weeks ago, or, now that I think about it, it occurred near the end of autumn, when my partner discovered a fairy ring of mushrooms and poked each mushroom in it, in addition to stepping into the center of it. Dear, why not just leave the door unlocked and wait for the fairy to appear? Anyway, ever since he messed with the fairy circle, I have kept an ear out for peculiar behavior and have essentially told the woods that their prodding does not constitute an invitation inside. Then winter arrived, and the area became colder than it is now. A few weeks ago, on this particular night, it was around 2 or 3 in the morning. The temperature was in the single digits, but according to my phone, it felt like -3 Fahrenheit. Without any discernible cause, my partner and I both awaken at the same time. Although we have neighbors on both sides of us, they are quiet at night. One side has a homeowners association and is essentially dead silent after 10 p.m., while the other one is right next to us. We told each other that we were awake, and one of the cats was really happy to see us up and wanted to hug. We all hear it as we are unsuccessfully attempting to push him away. Whistling. The whistling in the woods was so faint that the cat's purring was able to drown it out. But then he stopped, and we all heard it. It was a cheery little tune that made you want to go for a walk. However, it was coming from the woods, and it was quite chilly outside. The cat stopped if it carried on for any longer, and resumed purring after a brief while. It has not been heard since. A part of me would like to believe the high school custodian was thrilled. The cat stopped if it carried on for any longer, and resumed purring after a brief while. It has not been heard since. An Uber Kidnapper. This happened about 4 months ago now, maybe more, but I really don't know for sure. Anyway, I was 19 years old. I've turned 20 by now, mid-February. and was going home from university after classes. I usually take my keys with me, but around that time, I had lost them, and my mom was yet to take me to get a new copy. I remember I kept insisting, but she wouldn't listen. So what I did was knock on the door to get my younger brother's attention so he'd come and let me in. But my mom also took his keys and just left him there locked up as well. I asked my brother to pass me my charger from my room, and I called one of my aunties to see if I could go hang out at her workplace in the meantime. She said yes, and then told me to call an Uber that she'd be paying for as soon as I got there, and that's what I did. Now, the Uber didn't pick me up exactly at home. It was in the house across the street instead. No special reason, it just did. The moment I saw the guy, he gave me kind of a weird vibe. But I also tend to be paranoid every time I so much as hop on a taxi, so I just got in, rolled down the window, and kept a grip on both of my phones. It all seemed relatively normal until we got to the area where my aunt's workplace was. This was a convenience store at her home in a housing. I think that's what you call it? When there's like a private division? I don't know, but condominium didn't sound right. He just completely drove past it and claimed he was following the GPS when I asked him about it, but he wouldn't let me see said GPS. He seemed to know exactly where he was going now. I was kinda doomed from the beginning because I don't know directions, and I could only rely on the driver being a decent person and recognizing the area, which I did, but wherever he was taking me, I had no idea. I remember seeing this fountain that I could recognize from when Mom drove to my uncle's place, but that was like way farther away from my aunt's place. By now, I was kind of thinking of what to do, 'cause this couple of them even seemed to be still under construction. Then he stopped near a place that looked like the end of civilization. We were literally on a hill, and then he turned off the car. I got lucky in so many ways, looking back on it. My phone had no credit. As soon as I thought of that, my aunt called me and asked, "Where are you?" And I literally felt my heart drop because I had no idea, and this dude was just staring at me. I said I didn't know and asked him, "Hey, where did you take me?" And he replied with, "I wouldn't know what to tell you, kid." That was enough for me. I grabbed my backpack and opened the door really quick with a loud, "That's fine, I'll see myself out." I remember even being afraid of carrying my backpack on the back in case he'd chase me and pull on it, so I was holding it in my hand with my hoodie wrapped around my waist as I thought of where to hide. I thought of knocking on someone's door, but for some reason, that didn't seem safe to me at the moment. I remember telling my aunt not to hang up because he was still following me on the car. Then I saw an empty barren surrounded by concrete walls and a strong bar gate, except there was enough space under the gate to crawl in. So I literally threw the backpack and then crawled under. There was a huge electric control box, and I opened it to crouch inside and hide. My aunt's still on the phone. She, my other aunt, and my uncle were all on a call with each other, putting credit on my phone and asking for my live location through WhatsApp, because I had no idea where I was, literally in the middle of nowhere. I waited there for like 2 hours and this guy wouldn't leave. I even had to go pee outside the box and immediately ran back inside. There were even tiny spiders and old honeycombs, so I was also fighting both my arachnophobia and trypophobia. At some point, I'm guessing the guy left and my uncle got there in his truck. He didn't know where I was, so he kept honking and telling me to tell him when I could hear it closer. And then I finally did and got out. For a while, I thought maybe this had been a misunderstanding, and I just jumped out of some guy's car like a maniac without even paying him. But then, when I got home after staying at my aunt's pharmacy for a while, until my mom, who still didn't know much about what had happened, picked me up, I checked the Uber app, and not only did it say I had already paid, but it also said I made it to my destination, so I ruled that out. I had told my aunts not to tell Mom about it, because she goes insane at the minor inconvenience. So telling her this would only freak her out, and she wouldn't be any help. I only let her know when I called her to come get me, and on our way to get a copy of that key, because of course, something bad had to happen until she actually listened to me, and nowadays she always puts credit on my phone. Anyway, so that's what went down. My family brags about how I was able to keep myself perfectly composed and react quickly, which I'm still shocked about. I remember seeing broken glass and metal bars laying around, and telling my aunt, if I'm going down, I'm taking him with me, in a joking manner. On our way home, my mom told me I wasn't in hysterics because I was in shock and that it had hit me the next day. It didn't. I kept going around as normal, but last week she brought it up again and asked if I didn't think I was gonna die. I said of course, but that I also knew freaking out would only either make me easier target or just not help at all anyway. When I remember it, more than scared, I feel angry. I could have been one of the many girls who just disappear and are later found dead on a random hill or ditch. And I can't say I suffer survivor's guilt, because in all honesty I don't. But I can't help but think that could have been me whenever another kid or teenager is on the news as missing or found dead. It really could have gone terribly wrong. My parents believe this guy was a rookie who maybe felt sorry for me and let me go, because if he had wanted to, he could have hurt me with some sort of weapon, or just tried to kill me right then and there. I don't even know anymore. I sent his profile to all the girls I know, so that if they ever happen to get him as their Uber driver, they can cancel. Since then, I don't take Ubers anymore. Chaos on Transatlantic flight. This was a long time ago, so the timeline might be a little bit off, and some details are fuzzy, but I've written it out exactly as I recall it. In the early 2000s, my family was living in Europe, and in December of 2001, we were coming back home to Latin America for Christmas vacation. My brother and I, both in high school at the time, and my dad, were flying together from Paris to Miami. My dad was seated in business class, while my brother and I were in coach, sitting in the middle 2 seats of the middle row. The flight was pretty normal at first, absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. About 4 or 5 hours into the flight, I was reading a book, almost dozing off, when I heard a woman start to repeat the word no over and over. At first, it was really quiet, almost inaudible, but it quickly got very loud and urgent. Before I realized what was happening, she was screaming, "No! No! No!" at the top of her lungs. I looked up and saw a flight attendant a few rows ahead of me to the right, hunched over someone sitting on the window seat. My first thought was that a passenger was having a heart attack or some catastrophic health problem. But her yelling was so unsettling that this couldn't be it. There was a strangely long delay in people's reactions. Nobody did anything. I completely panicked and froze in my seat. My brother, on the other hand, jumped up out of his seat, jumped over the person sitting on the aisle seat to his right, and ran up to see what was going on. He was up there in a matter of seconds, and as he approached, suddenly everyone around us stood up to see what was going on and or try to help. She kept screaming, and now she was struggling with this passenger. He was really tall, so tall that his whole head was visible over the back of the seat, and he had long curly black hair. My brother came back to our row and said, "Something is wrong," before going back up to get a closer look. Passengers close to her began struggling with the guy as well. A bunch of people jumped on him and started pulling at him, and someone in the row behind him even pulled his hair back so hard his face jerked towards the top of the plane. He let out a really loud scream, and then there was chaos. The aisles were so crowded nobody could move, and I saw a fire extinguisher being passed hand to hand from the back of the plane. I immediately thought there was a fire, and that we were all going to die. It was an incredibly hopeless sensation to know that there's nowhere to run and no way to escape this situation unfolding in front of you. They passed the extinguisher up to a male flight attendant near the guy, and the flight attendant hit him with the butt of the extinguisher really hard on the face. They started asking for belts, headphones, straps, etc. Anything they could use to restrain him. My brother took off his belt and gave it to them, and they wrapped everything they could around the passenger's arms, shoulders, and torso, securing him to the seat. I saw the male flight attendant who had hit him with the extinguisher carry a pair of large black tennis shoes to the back of the plane, which at the time seemed kind of strange, but I didn't think much of it. The flight attendants asked if there was a doctor on board to sedate the guy. People kept asking if there was a flight marshal on board, but nobody came forward. I can't remember exactly how or when things calmed down, but eventually everyone was told to return to their seats. A small group of the people that helped restrain the guy were asked to keep guard on a rotation. There were always at least a few people sitting behind him and or next to him, keeping an eye on him. I think there was even someone behind him holding a fistful of his hair for the rest of the flight. The pilot announced over the PA that there had been a security breach. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was vague. And that we were being diverted to Boston Logan Airport. He said they didn't know if the person was working alone, so get to know your neighbor. We were in the middle of the Atlantic, with maybe 4 more hours to go before we could land. Things were a bit ominous and tense, but for the most part, everyone was friendly and in a pretty good mood. Nobody knew what had actually happened. We weren't allowed to get up from our seats, and if you had to use the bathroom, you needed to call a flight attendant to escort you to the lavatory, where you weren't allowed to lock the door. I remember a grumpy old French man a few rows from us got really annoyed after a while, and kept getting up without permission just to annoy the flight attendants. They were not happy. After a while, they put on the movie Legally Blonde to distract passengers. My brother and I went up to business class to talk to my dad. Apparently, they didn't hear the extent of the chaos back in coach, and they were all going about business as usual, pun intended. A few hours later, as we approached the US, we saw fighter jets outside of the windows on both sides of the plane. The pilot announced that they were escorting us to Boston. A few little kids got really excited watching the jets. I later learned that these are a last resort security measure to prevent hijacked planes from repeating 9/11 style attacks. They were supposed to shoot us down in case of a major threat. We landed and were told to stay seated. A SWAT team came on board, carrying assault rifles and tons of body armor, cut off all of the guy's restraints, and took him off of the plane. I saw everything in detail, since we were seated only a few seats behind him. We were parked in the middle of the tarmac for a long time before we were allowed to disembark. I remember seeing pieces of my brother's belt on the guy's seat as we left, and thought about taking one as a souvenir, but thought better of it. We were escorted to a baggage claim area in Boston Logan Airport that was surrounded by a large metal fence to keep us all in one place. We were there for what felt like 3 or 4 hours, just waiting anxiously, and nobody would explain anything to us. Passengers were getting really agitated, shaking the metal fences and yelling at airport personnel that this was inhumane treatment. There was no food, nowhere to sit, and children were crying. Dozens of people were trying to sleep on the baggage carousel. They finally ordered a bunch of pizzas and led us into a waiting area with actual chairs, where each passenger was interrogated by the FBI. They were astonishingly unfriendly. I guess they were trying to discern if the guy had any partners on board. They then shuttled us to our baggage, where security officers thoroughly hand-searched every single passenger's shoes, suitcases, and carry-on bags, and patted everyone down. We were finally allowed to make a phone call, and I called my mom. The rest of the family was completely hysterical. They had been watching the news all day and knew that an Islamic extremist terrorist had tried to blow up our flight with a bomb that he had smuggled on board in his shoe. We had absolutely no idea what had really happened until this moment, as we were kept completely in the dark. It was a very strange sensation. Up until this point, my dad, brother, and I had actually remained pretty relaxed considering the circumstances, and were more annoyed about the inconvenient changes to our travel itinerary than the crazy experience on the plane. We had no idea how bad the security breach really was, and how close we came to being killed. After about 12 hours in Boston, we were put on another flight home. My brother made the mistake of giving a few interviews to CNN and other networks while we were in Boston. So when we landed in our small country, he was immediately swarmed by the press and gave a bunch of interviews despite being exhausted. I was happy to finally sit and relax with my family after the longest and most stressful trip of my life. We later learned that the bomber, Richard Reed, had actually tried to board the same flight on the previous day. He was detained and questioned by French security because of multiple red flags. He had no luggage and purchased a one-way ticket with cash, causing him to miss his flight. They put him on the next day's flight and put him up in a hotel kind of far from the airport, since everything nearby was booked. The following day it rained, and on the walk from the hotel to the airport, his shoes got wet. This might have been why he had trouble lighting the wick in his shoe. His plan was to light it in mid-flight. He waited until the passenger next to him went to the bathroom, then tried to light his shoe with matches. The female flight attendant that first engaged him had smelled the matches and was walking up and down the aisle looking for a passenger who, she assumed, was trying to smoke a cigarette. She saw him with the shoe in his lap and immediately tried to take it from him. They struggled and he bit her hand. Reed is now serving 3 life terms in prison. Christmas alone. Friends went to Mexico for a vacation and asked me to house sit and take care of their dogs while they were gone. They pay me $40 a day just to sit around and let the dogs out when they need to go. I am disabled, so that helps a lot. This is a semi-rural area, and houses are roughly a quarter-mile apart. Police have to come from town, 15 miles away, and response time can be well over an hour. I always take my pistol with me. It's always been quiet when I've stayed there. This time was different. I was in the shower when the dogs started barking and growling. They are big, large German shepherds, and one is actually police trained. The owners loan him to county as a drug dog, and if you tell them to be quiet, they obey. This time they didn't, so I went on high alert. I shut off the water and looked out the window. I didn't see anything, but when I walked out of the bathroom, I saw a shadow go across the bedroom window. They have lights around the house that stay on all night. I whispered to the dogs to hush, and they did. That's when I heard a man's voice. I couldn't make out everything he was saying, but I distinctly heard 2 words, "Come around," so I am sure there was more than one person. I ran into the living room with my pistol and saw the door handle turn. I yelled, "I have a gun!" I heard feet run away. I was telling Siri to dial 911 and got the county sheriff fast. She said there were 2 cars on another call not far away, but it would take about 20 minutes for them to get there. That's better than the usual hour. but I was pretty shaken. I explained that I was on a farm and would have to go down to the road and unlock a cattle gate to let them in, and to please tell the officers that I would be carrying a pistol and please don't shoot me by mistake, because I was not going outside the house without it. The dispatcher said, "Oh no, do not go out there without your gun. I will tell them. The one good thing about living in a red state." She asked if I could see the road, and I can. So she said to wait in the house until I saw blue lights. I hung up and called my friends in Mexico. Their camera footage can be downloaded via app, and they said they would go through it while I waited for the cops. I locked the house and went down to the gate when the police arrived. They searched the whole place, including the barn, but didn't find anyone. While they were looking, my friends texted me the camera footage. There was a man on the porch. Unfortunately, the cameras were not angled to get a shot of his face, and it was of course dark. I still think there was more than one creep because of what he said. Come round. The police were very nice and said they had passed a man on a bike on the way, which is strange for this area, especially at night, and went to look for him, but that's all they could do. They took a full report, but never caught the creep. My husband came and stayed with me the rest of their trip. One of their neighbors said he found a tent and some gear in the woods a few weeks before, so somebody was living back there. Maybe a homeless person from town? I have house sat again since then, and it was quiet. They are going away again for Christmas, and I will be there again. A lot of people ask me if I would have shot the creep had he broken in. Yeah, absolutely. I would be sorry I had to hurt somebody, but if it's them or me, yeah. Hide and seek game. I had a quite nice childhood looking back, and nothing bad ever occurred to me. Rarely did I get sick, never broke any bones, and I never fought with my cousins when I went to visit. Not to brag, but I was pretty much the picture of innocence. However, I had had the oddest experience while I was visiting my elder cousins, and even now I still struggle to convince myself that it was all in my head. My age at the time was probably around 6, yet I can still vividly recall every detail of that evening. The majority of the day, my cousins and I were climbing trees, and after it got dark, we went inside. My aunt and uncle left for a dinner date, so... In any case, Jim had to go first, because he had misplaced the rock-paper-scissors game, and Rob and I dispersed to find a hiding location. My preferred hiding place, the sofa, was closer to the wall than usual, so I initially tried squeezing behind it. Even though I was lanky, I couldn't fit at the time. As a last resort, I raced inside their bedroom and started looking around, trying to find any spot to hide, no matter how obvious. He was halfway through counting. Fortunately, the space was fairly disorganized, so I reasoned that if I hid below the desk, I would blend in just fine. Anything was preferable to being discovered without a place to hide. I asked her to let me join him under the cover, but as I reached out to do so, he backed away. I moved in closer and tried to touch him again while muttering a very lengthy please, but he quickly wrenched away from me. Since he arrived before me, it seems sense that I should be the one who is caught first, I reasoned. So fine, I guess that's fair enough. I teased him, saying I could see his hair nonetheless, and he fumbled in the blanket, trying to hide it but failing. From where I was hiding, I could see that it was definitely an excellent sight, because numerous boxes blocked the view of the door that was around the corner, making it unlikely that anyone would have noticed us if they had just glanced over the room. I knelt down and muttered how great of a hiding place this was. Ray reacted by rustling about under the blanket. Then, out of nowhere, I heard Jim enter the room. He looked around and checked under the bunk beds, which were located directly across from the desk. I stopped breathing. He stood up and made his way to the closet to check things out before leaving the space once more. I quietly exhaled a breath of relief and told Rob how near we were as he rustled once more under the cover. I heard Jim and Rob both shout the standard "Ollie Ollie Oxenfree" from outside the room. I exclaimed, "Come on, Rob," as I started to stand up, pleased of myself for not losing the game of hide and seek, but he remained tucked away. I then realized that I had heard both of my cousins beg for me to come out at that point. I mentally went backwards till I realized that just my 2 cousins and I were at home. I panicked as I hurried to the other room and saw 2 of my cousins there, standing there. Someone else was in the room, which I quickly attempted to clarify to them. They were naturally reluctant to believe me because they were older, but I tried to explain as quickly as I could that someone else was in the room with me. It took some serious pulling, but I eventually managed to get them to the hiding place so I could show them. We glanced behind the desk and my heart sank. The blanket lay flat on the ground. When I unsuccessfully examined the entire room from top to bottom, including the crates next to the desk, for any sign of the figure, or anything I might have confused it for, my cousins laughed at me. It was gone, and still, many years later, I have no explanation of what it could have been, and frankly, I'm glad I never got to see what was underneath that blanket. Skinwalker Chased Me. I had a Skinwalker encounter in Red Mesa, Arizona. For some background, I'm indigenous, and not only of the belief, but have had encounters out of the Southwest. I was driving about 12 miles deep on the dirt roads, county. The sun was setting, and I saw a dog, but he was running in circles. Then, when I came up on him, he started to doing zigzags. It wasn't walking normally like an animal should. Despite the many surrounding lights, the dog appeared to be entirely black. It was silhouetted just enough that you could see its muscle definition. I could see a slight reflection in its eyes. It seemed to lack a shadow. It looked like a human tongue, and I started feeling a stomach sinking feeling, and he turned around and looked at me, and the tongue was dramatically off. I saw the dog's jaw open, almost as if it was about to bark. Also, a distant yet extremely clear, high-pitched, "Come here." The dog immediately turned to take off. I felt like death, turned around the corner. The creature was unreasonably far up the road for the short amount of time that it was not being observed. It was wobbling, crossing its paws, walking oddly. When it turned left around a corner, it seemed to nearly stand up on its hind paws, walking on two legs, just before passing around out of sight. The rest of the night was just as interesting. We had trouble with certain objects slightly moving place, nudging a bit, settling. It quickly became more aggressive. But then, just as we were about to leave, we heard a loud and persistent knocking coming from the front of the store. We quickly went to my cars, sped it up to 40, and as I got away, not 5 minutes later, a Navajo police car passed me, heading in that direction. I always wondered what he saw, or why he was going that way. Maybe going home. Maybe he got a report. But I was out of there, and by the time the sun set, I was in Ute Mountain Nation, and it got scary dark. I'm just glad I got out of there before dark fell, and before whatever that thing was might have shape-shifted into human form and tried to get into my car. On the drive home, I tried to blast music and ignore what I had just seen. I heard whispering coming from my back seat. I couldn't quite make out any words. It just sounded like whistling almost. But get this, I saw a random antique clawfoot bathtub on the left side of the road, in a field. It was certainly not there the day before, or even that morning on my drive there. The kicker? I was watching the sidelines of the roads for animals, and I most certainly saw a buck. He was leaping out in front of the road, a good 50 feet ahead. I slammed on my brakes, but when I got closer, it was merely a bush. I've been unable to sleep again thanks to this, and the fact that it's happened 3 nights in a row. Now, while I think it could be a skinwalker, I think it could also be a wendigo. They're similar, and wendigos come from Algonquin-speaking tribes, of which my tribe is part of. If it was the latter, though, I have a hunch it would have made itself more known already. Whereas with a skinwalker, methinks it could be trying to lure me out to the darkness of the shop. I've been trying to get a hold of a medicine man here in Oregon, but all I can find on Google is old articles, almost as if it refuses to let me find the help I need so desperately. If anyone knows where I can find one to come bless the house and the property, I would be related to get this over with. These past few nights alone have been hellish, and I would rather not have to see what I've heard described many times for myself. Thanks for reading if you've made it this far, and any advice is welcomed. I swear, this entire story is true, through and through, and I just want peace out here. Stranger danger. This is actually my stepmom's story. I have my own, but I'm so hesitant to drag some of them up. I'm hoping telling someone else's will open me to it a little more. My stepmom didn't like us much, but she told my sister, 3 years older, and I, this experience growing up to scare us out of being stupid. My stepmom, we're going to call her Macy, grew up as a kind of privileged teen in the 70s. And her mom had moved their family over here, the States, from England when she was about 9. She went to a pretty nice high school in a really nice town. There, she made friends with a girl, Lily, who didn't exactly run with Macy's type of crowd. Popular, stereotypical, etc. They really hit it off, and Lily would take Macy out to do her type of stuff. Hiking, fishing, sailing. There's even a hilarious set of pictures of them camping. My stepmom has raccoon eyes and looks like she hates everything. Anyways, because of Lily's influence, the two of them would do stuff like that a good amount. One Sunday, they decided to go hike in some hills about an hour away. Macy put on what I'm sure were her extremely expensive hiking shoes, and the two of them drove off to the hiking trails. Lily parked in this big clearing with makeshift parking spots. You know, like a piece of wood marking the head of a space. But there were no other cars there. This was only important in hindsight. They started hiking up the hill, off the path, because Lily fancied herself as something of a badass. The hike was nothing extraordinary. If you asked my stepmom, she would just lament for 15 minutes how sticky and buggy it was. Anyways, they reached the top of the hill, and my stepmom was done. The polished, pampered side of her was coming out, and she groaned until Lily begrudgingly said, okay. They would rest and then walk down again, slower. They had been heading down the hill for maybe 10 minutes. Lily conceded to walking down the side of the road instead of the rough hiking trail. So there they are, probably looking like a couple of tools geared up for hiking and walking down a crappy road. And after not even 5 minutes, a truck pulled up next to them. It was red and rusty, and just generally looked like a clunker. The guy driving rolled down the window, and the girls looked in through the passenger side window. He had a big beard, a baseball cap pulled down, and long brown hair. He greeted them and even smiled through his beard, asking if they needed a ride. Macy described him as charming and even cute. Lily still says the moment he greeted them, her hackles went up. Despite her better judgment, my stepmom convinced her to get in the truck. It must only be a 10-minute drive down to the car, tops. The two girls opened the passenger's door to this rusty old thing, and the guy directed them behind the seat to get into the back. They settled in, and the truck started rumbling forwards. Lily always says that was the point it hit her what a mistake they had just made. The back seat was clean enough, but there was a rope on the floor behind the driver's seat, and 4 boxes of saran wrap half hanging out from under the passenger's seat. It seemed creepy and weird, but Lily didn't want to freak my stepmom out, so she just kept her mouth shut. After 10 minutes, The woods didn't look any clearer, and they hadn't seen another car the whole time. Lily asked how long he thought it would be. He said he was taking a different route down the hill and had to stop somewhere to get something first. That was it. The girls were 16 or 17, and Lily didn't want to press the issue. She was scared. She can remember his hair because she was sitting behind him. He looked like a woodsy guy, but his hair was super tangled and dirty. She noticed crusted mud on his collar and tried to find something identifiable about him, but just got scared the more she picked up on little details. He was youngish, strong-looking, and had a 1 foot on both of them. So they didn't ask any more questions, and he didn't offer any information, and they drove on. Several minutes after that, they reached a tiny log cabin-looking place, right there in a clearing of trees. There was an old stump where someone had been chopping wood, and a huge axe stuck into the log. Lily was definitely on red alert now. The guy turned off the truck and slipped out of it, saying, "I'll be right back. Don't get out." And he disappeared into the house. Lily tried to talk to my stepmom about how she was incredibly uncomfortable, but she mostly just dismissed it. Lily started begging, increasingly freaked out, and finally put her foot down, demanding Macy exited the truck with her. So they got out and walked around the front of the vehicle. The house was about 50 yards in front of them. Why this guy would have left 2 young girls in the truck alone while going into the house is beyond me. And they wandered around, looking at it hesitantly. If this guy really was decent and just trying to give them a ride, it would be super rude to just run off, right? My stepmom had this strict upbringing when it came to manners and a public persona, and she saw it as an issue of that nature. So she actually started to head back to the truck, opening the front door to climb in behind the driver's seat. Lily was pissed off and followed her to yell some more. On the driver's side floor, half hidden under the seat, there was a big hatchet. It had dried red-brown stains covering the blade and stuck to the floor under it. My stepmom started getting hysterical. They decided that leaving was by far their best option at this point, and just booked it off the side of property into the trees. They bumbled around in the trees for a little while, until Lily was fairly confident they were on their way back down the hill. My stepmom cried all the way down. Lily felt bad about it, but was also completely freaked out that he would heart it, and kept trying to calm her down. When they finally got back down to the bottom and saw the old wooden fence that surrounded the original parking area, they were relieved. But as they got closer, they saw it. The truck. It was parked on the other side of the gravelly makeshift lot, just sitting there, facing the other way innocently. They couldn't see if anyone was in it, and of course, Macy wanted to run for the car, but Lily was super hesitant. She managed to calm my stepmom down, saying she wanted to wait before running out into the open to see what was out there. Remember, this is the 70s. No cell phones. There was no ranger station or anyone around. The parking lot was big and empty and open, and who knows what would have happened if they decided to stroll across it. Thankfully, Lily convinced my stepmom to chill, and the two of them hunkered down against a big tree, hidden by bushes and other trees, and waited it out for what was seemed to be a couple of hours. When dark started to fall, all the animals started coming out and making noises, and my stepmom, predictably, started getting antsy about this and bothering Lily, who was tired and moments away from giving in. She was just planning their dash to the car when they heard a clunk. Across the twilight-lit lot, they watched as one of the back doors of their car swung open, and the bearded guy slid his way out of the back seat. He got out, shut the door, looked around at the surrounding woods for several moments, and then walked back to his truck. The truck lumbered past their car and out of sight. Several minutes after watching him drive away, they sprinted to their car as fast as they could, jumped in, and peeled out before they had even shut the doors. If this guy is still alive, he's really old. But still, let's just not meet. The call every night. I come from a very spiritual family, and both my mom and my aunt have mediumistic gifts. They experienced astral projection when sleeping since they were teenagers, and they've also seen spirits multiple times. I was in my preteen stage when my grandma passed. I can recall every dream I've had about her after, and the fact that she never said anything to me until the very last dream. However, she always had very distinct facial expressions. The night she died, I woke up because I dreamed that she was dying, and I felt someone touch my shoulder. I looked at the time, and it was 4:30ish in the morning, and I went back to sleep. After waking up that morning, I talked to my mom because she was calling me, and she said Grandma had passed in the night. I asked what time did she go, and my mom said 4:30ish. I thought about the times and realized that I woke up from the dream at the same time that she died. I told my mom about the dream and waking up, and she didn't know what to say. I don't know why, but my grandma came to me right after she passed for whatever reason. After the wake, I quickly fall into sleep again. This time, dreams came to me. The first dream I had was nearly right after she passed. I believe it was that very same night. She had passed in early morning. This dream was themed on a Sunday. I know this because before she got emergency custody of me, she'd take me back home on Sundays after coming over that Friday. We got in the car. She didn't look at me or make eye contact, but she had this grim look on her face. No smile, which was very unusual for her. We drive up to the stop sign, make a right turn, and everything fades into white. Standing around were many, many people, some of which I had known from my childhood, but had already long passed away. Some chatting here and there, but no distinct words I could hear. Then I wake up. The second dream isn't very necessary. Don't know where I was, but my grandpa and I were in this huge warehouse. The only time I saw her, she was laying on the ground, definitely dead. Third dream was years later. I was at their house, the very house she died in. I looked in the walkway and saw her standing there with an angry look on her face. Also seemed to be disappointed. This is strange because at that time I had gotten bad into drug use and already got diagnosed with alcoholism. I was 15, by the way, so I didn't even know someone that young could be diagnosed with something of that sort, but it happened. She hated drugs because of my dad and uncle, believed it was sinful, rightly so. Fourth dream was after I got clean off of the drugs. I was happy, got a job, and finally cut off the people I needed out of my life. This dream consisted of her and I sitting on her couch. We had the TV tray out in front of us, which was a normal occurrence, and she finally looked happy. The only thing she said to me was, "You'll never see me again," with a smile on her face. After that I woke up, and sure enough, I've never had a dream of her since. I feel like it might be important to mention, and I don't know why, I just feel like it is, that I used to take care of developmentally disabled seniors, and one of the people I cared for, I'll call her M, passed away, and it was very traumatic for me. A few days after she had passed away, I had a dream that I was working in the house where M lived, and I still worked there, but I was fixing dinner for everybody else who lived at that house, and everybody was really sad about M passing away. I turned around to start giving everybody their plates, and wind started to swirl all around the dining room and kitchen. M, who used to walk with a cane, had walked up to me with no cane, no limp, and I could hear her speech clear as day, whereas before, when she was alive, I couldn't. And she said to me, "I am okay. Don't worry about me. I am fine now. Thank you, and I love you." And she walked back through the wind with a smile on her face and out towards the front door. Do these seem like visiting dreams to you? Or am I just a hugely emotional person? LOL. I would love any and all interpretations, for anybody has, and thank you so much for your time. Also, I apologize for any grammar errors. My keyboard kind of freezes up when I'm on my mobile, and I will try to edit after I restart my phone. Some would say it's a weird coincidence, but I'm sure there's much more to it. At least, that's what I'd like to believe. There is a feeling or sense associated a certain type of dream. It's like I am consciously aware that it's more than just a dream. Can't describe it accurately. Somehow, I just know. However, I'm sure she was there. She was rooting for me, perhaps even helping you along. The woods. The young girl made her way through the thick undergrowth. It was not yet dusk, but the sun would disappear quickly behind the densely packed trees. There is a sort of amplified silence that resonates through woods. All outside noise is cut off, so that the only remaining sound is the woods itself. That's why the sudden crashing to the side of the girl startled her so much. Animals know the danger of making such noise. This was no animal. She spun around as a man emerged from the foliage. Surprise flashed across his face, but was almost instantly replaced with a warm smile. "Hello, little lady." The man's hands were dirty. He was carrying a shovel. The girl wondered what he was doing out here. He spoke again. "What's your name?" "Goldilocks." The man laughed at this. "Well, I guess that makes me Papa Bear." He smiled widely. "What's a girl as young as you doing out here all by yourself?" "Looking for my friend Janie?" "Well, I can help you look for her." He grabbed hold of her hand. "Where's little Janie likely to be hiding?" The girl looked sad. "She's not hiding. She's missing. Me and Janie used to play in the woods together, but last week she didn't come back." "The woods can be a dangerous place for a little girl. Don't worry though, I'll take good care of you." Again he smiled that big smile of his. The man began to lead the young girl further into the woods. Hand in hand, they walked on until the trees towering above them entirely blocked out the sky. The girl shivered. "Poor little thing, you'll catch your death." They both stopped as the man lay down the shovel. He took off his jacket and helped the girl into it. He gave her shoulders a gentle rub. "Do you want to know a story about these woods? Bad things happen in here, that's what I heard. There was once a little girl who was walking through here all alone. It had gotten so dark that she couldn't find her way back home. Luckily for her, she found a nice man in the woods." "Lucky for her," the girl said. "Lucky for both of them. He was able to take her back to his house, his little gingerbread house, all alone in the woods." "That sounds nice," the girl said. "What happened next?" Unfortunately, the girl was naughty. She wasn't grateful to the man for saving her. She ran off back into the woods. That night, the little girl died, all alone in the woods. No one ever saw her again. "How do you know she died if she was never found?" the girl asked. The man leaned down, drawing his face close to the girl's. "Someone has to know, don't they?" The young girl smiled as she swung the shovel into the side of the man's head. "Your stories are so good. I think you'll make a great friend for Janie." The girl whistled to herself as she began to dig a hole. "Who knocks my door?" All of this began 3 weeks ago. A sudden tapping on her window had roused her. She continued sleeping after brushing it off as the wind playing pranks. The following night, the slight tapping on the window turned into a knocking sound. She couldn't move until the knocking stopped as she sat trembling on her bed. The following morning, she was confident that she had been hallucinating. Her room was on the 3rd story, and there were no trees or drain pipes outside that could provide unauthorized visitors entrance. In any case, she assured herself, it wasn't knocking. It had to be one of the numerous enigmatic sounds that the night incorporates into its lullaby. 2 days went by. She heard the knock again as she was carving in her workshop downstairs. She briefly went rigid with fear. Her turn came next. A young youngster stood outside the window, hanging backwards. Through the glass, only his head could be seen. He could have passed for a street urchin, with his dark, long, and unclean hair, and incredibly pale complexion. His eyes saved him. The eyes weren't human. They were slanted, circular, and had irises that were improbably big. He grinned slyly at her before tapping the window once more when it was upside down. He begged the woman, "Please, lady, won't you let me in?" Because the child talked in a man's voice, with a husky, cruel tone, she startled and lurched backwards, knocking her unfinished sculpture to the ground and scattering clay flecks everywhere. He began paying her visits more frequently banging on the doors and windows. She argued, "No, don't allow him in. Don't let him inside, whatever you do." Until she started keeping the curtains closed and the windows secured, she would notice him peeping out of her windows whenever she woke up. She didn't pay attention to the constant knocking or his voice. "Excuse me, woman, will you not let me in?" She began to suspect everything. Every day as she left the house for work, she was filled with intense internal anguish. The majority of the time, everything seemed normal. Until that certain day. Due to a lack of sleep that day, she was already starting to feel a little queasy. A priest or therapist might be good people to talk to, according to her coworker's advice. She said, "Yes, I will today." Someone suddenly rapped on her car window. She exhaled, her eyes widening in fear. It was a police officer. In front of a prohibited parking notice, she had parked. She reared out, parked once again, and hurried to get to work while swearing. Readers, lovers, and businessmen who needed a cup of tea or coffee before rushing back to their workplaces frequented the cozy, glass-walled cafe where she worked. Before she would leave, it would be an hour. When a whisper reached her ears, she was tending to a table near the enormous glass wall. It stated, "Hey, lady." She snapped her head up to the window, where she saw him standing. With his black, slanting eyes and a cunning smirk, he was standing in the midst of the road. He was still standing in the middle of the busy road as she hastily ran to the sidewalk while the traffic was zooming by him. "I asked for help, didn't I?" the child muttered. From the youngster's throat, the man spoke. "I am a good boy, madam." Then, suddenly, a bus rushed by him, passing directly over the area where he was standing. He was nowhere to be found when she shouted and dashed into oncoming traffic. On the rough, dark road, she knelt to her knees. As she sobbed, a few onlookers stopped to attempt and comfort her. Her return to reality took some time. She got in her car and drove as quickly as she could home. She entered the bathroom immediately after rushing upstairs and doused herself in cold water. She took a glance at her emaciated and skull-like visage in the mirror. She questioned, "What have you done to yourself?" She froze in her tracks as soon as she entered the room. He was there, leaning against the window ledge, with his slender, short legs hanging inside. The silky voice sighed, "You left the window open." He approached her side, seized her hand in his little icy palm, and began tugging her towards the window with startling force. Despite her best efforts, she was helpless to resist him. No matter how hard she pushed and pulled, she was unable to stop her feet from dragging her towards the direction of the open window. As her boots carried her forward, she ground her heels into the wooden floor and felt splinters fly off of it. The wind blew in her face and caused her hair to fly around as her hands clutched the windowsill. Her eyes widened as she stared up at the navy blue sky with its sorrowful gray moon and uneven scattering of stars, feeling helpless and terrified. Despite being unable to move, she turned to face him as he stood next to her and looked at him imploringly. With her voice choking from fright, she cried out, "Please!" He returned his attention to her eyes and that smile.